Everyone. Hello. Super excited to be back today with another mini podcasting session. I am really excited about this topic. I think that SEO and your podcast show notes are such an important topic that is picking up steam. Like I see people talking about it, but there's still a lot of uh haziness and like mystique about podcast show notes and how that works. So I have been over the last 2 years doing a lot of experimentation on my show and also suggesting different strategies for my podcast coaching clients to see the maximum success. And yes, your podcast show notes are so important and it's an integral part of growing your show. And what I love about podcast show notes is that it really allows you to take a step back from constantly having to promote your show on social media. I think that's where a lot of us get really tired and distracted. Yes, I use the word distracted because we are feeling like we have to constantly promote our shows, which takes us away from the other tasks that the other important tasks that we have to do. And now we're tired. And the likeliness of us actually pod fading, stopping to podcast, pausing our show indefinitely is very, very high. So today we're going to be talking about podcast show notes don'ts and the things that I see a lot of people doing that they should absolutely stop doing. And I have about 5 tips to share with you today. So I see Nikita. Hi, Nikita. How are you? Nikita says, really looking forward to this information. It is always relevant. I appreciate that. I really do appreciate that. All right. So let's go ahead. Oh, actually, before that, I have a list of things I wanted to talk about before we get into the meat and potatoes of today's topic. I want to introduce to these weekly chats that we have 2 things. I want to talk about wins for the week. And I also want to talk about just very briefly, like my thoughts for the week, like something in the podcasting industry that has captured me and I'm thinking about. So these are 2 things I want to introduce with every upcoming live that we do. So, a couple of just quick wins that I had this week. I was featured in Libsyn's blog. They're 4 Black podcasting creatives making history. Whoa, my goodness, like that's huge. So that was a huge honor, and I'm appreciative of Libsyn and also Elsie Escobar, the co-founder of She Podcast, for highlighting me and some incredible podcasters who are making history, who are doing a lot of innovative things, bringing the community together and amplifying Black voices. So I'm really appreciative of that feature. Also, I soft launch our brand new podcast. When I say our, it's Women of Color Podcasters, the podcast. So I would do a lot of different things in the podcasting industry, but it all really stems from my work inside of Women of Color Podcasters, or WOC Podcasters. So that is a podcasting community. We have fireside chats and we do co-working sessions and we bring guest experts to come in, and it's really a place for nurturing women of color in the audio industry. And over the last couple years, since I've been in the podcasting industry for the last 4 years, I've noticed that women of color are celebrated inside of our container, inside of our community. I feel like I have a really good sense of like who does what and what they're working on and the amazing things. But when you go outside of our community, there's just like you just don't hear about what we're working on, what we're doing, our accomplishments, our achievements. So I created this podcast as a way to highlight various women of color in the podcasting industry who are visionaries. They are moving the podcasting industry forward, whether you know of them or not. And I'm really excited for this mission-driven podcast. So when I say I soft launch it, that means that I'm kind of deconstructing what a launch looks like. So I'm kind of rolling with the flow, releasing episodes, talking about it here and there consistently, but not like putting so much pressure on like this launch. It has to be it. So I am kind of like deconstructing, uncoupling, and unlearning a lot of things. So as I continue with this soft launch, I'll circle back with you all and let you know how it's going, my findings, and like the things that I think are moving the podcast needle forward. So we have had a lot of traction. We have great support, like Podbean is supporting this show and providing us with lots of resources for growth. So I'll let you know how that goes. But I am excited about that soft launch. And let me see something else that I wanted to mention. Okay, so those are really the two big announcements and the big wins that I wanted to talk about today. And then a thought that I have for this week is for us to start thinking about podcast sponsors as our clients. So as our clients, there are a lot of things that if we had a client, right? If we had a client, what would we do? We would be nurturing them. We would be keeping in touch with them. We would be really working towards making sure that whatever service we provide is top notch and robust, right? So this is what I'm trying to like think about as a podcaster who offers sponsorships to different types of clients. So thinking about that journey, how to make my podcast sponsors and my clients like happy to work with me, things to make me stand out and apart. So I think I love to think about like sponsorships equals client are it's 100% on time for the topic of discussion. So thank you for bearing with me. And I love to see everyone's comments in the chat. Hi, Akila. Super nice to see you. Hi, Shamiko. Super great to see you as well. My connection is like terrible today, but we're going to keep going. So let's talk about some podcast show notes don'ts. And just to give you a 360 view, there are two different terms that I see people throwing out there, and I want to explain those first before we jump into the don'ts. So there's podcast episode descriptions, part one, and then podcast show notes, which is part two. So podcast episode descriptions are what you would see in the podcast players like Apple and Spotify. So these are like the placeholders that you see within the podcasting apps. Okay. However, you can also have podcast show notes, and it is highly recommended for you to have accompanying show notes that live on your website that offer an in-depth summary of the episode. Okay. The benefit of having both is that number one, within the podcast players have search engines. So pretty much they have these search engines that when people are typing things within the podcast player search bar, they have, AI behind the background, these algorithms behind the background that will serve up different episodes and different shows that they feel have synergy and fit. So there's podcast SEO, which is like within the podcast players. And there's also show notes, AKA blog post SEO, which is really attracting Google and other search engines to your content, directing traffic from these search queries to your actual website. Okay. So it's a two-pronged approach. When I'm thinking about SEO and discoverability, I'm thinking about the podcast players 100%, but I'm also thinking about my website, building a robust page that attracts people who are typing in search to find me. Okay. So, with that being said, today we're going to be focusing specifically on your show notes, meaning that this is the page on your website that breaks down everything they need to know about your episode. Okay. Does that make sense? Give me a high five. Yes. 1, 2, 3. Give me something in the chat. Let me know that this makes sense and that you're understanding what I'm saying. And I'm doing a good job explaining the two different aspects. I will say that podcast SEO, meaning like the SEO and the podcast players, is still really murky. Like I know some of the podcast players are starting to like release information of like how to optimize within those players. But as we know, there are dozens of podcast players out there that distribute our shows. So each one is different, right? Each one prioritizes different things. So I see podcasting discoverability as very staggered. So this is why podcast marketing people are like this strategy and this strategy and this strategy and this strategy, because there's just so many players out there, and we're trying our best to get in front of as many people as we can with this targeted approach. Okay, Nikita says yes. Okay, Shamiko says yes, that we get the differences. Okay, awesome, perfect. Now, with that, precursor, we're ready to talk about the podcast show notes don'ts. And I don't want to overwhelm you, so we're going to just talk about a handful of them. I have a mini podcast show notes checklist. If you reach out to me and say, Danielle, I'd like to have the checklist, reach out to me and I'll send it to you, where I break down the different elements to include as a checklist for your podcast show notes. But again, here's what I see a lot of people doing that I feel like they're missing the mark. So, one of the biggest mistakes, and the first thing podcasters do typically, is that they're embedding the podcast player from like a Libsyn or Podbean or whatever. They're embedding that in the first paragraph. They want people to know, I have a podcast, listen to my podcast, embed it number one. That is absolutely not the thing to do. You want to have your podcast player embedded a few paragraphs down, because the first paragraph is very important for your key words, meaning that Google's robots are trying to figure out what this page is all about. And after they read the title, they're going to go straight to the first paragraph. And if your first paragraph has a bunch of jibber jabber HTML text, you're missing the mark. Okay. So we want the first paragraph to be our hook, our explainer of like why this topic is important, introducing our guests, adding the key words, just like gripping these viewers, our website viewers, to be able to be like, cool, let's keep on reading. Okay. So this is a very important signal boost. Do not embed your podcast player in the first paragraph. I've seen some really great podcasting, like marketing experts, embed their podcast players in paragraph 3 or paragraph 2 or paragraph 5. So it's typically longer, it's like a lot of text, and a little bit lower down. So again, that is something that I see a lot of people doing. If you're doing that today, use the day that you're like, I ain't doing that no more. Okay. That's a very simple, easy fix. Okay. The next thing I see people doing is that they either don't even include the links to listen to the episode in various podcast players, or if they do include the links to the podcast players, it's to their general profile. Meaning, I just released episode number 130, for example, on the Thought Card podcast, my show. I am going to link out to that specific episode 130 on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, Stitcher, the like, right? I'm not going to link out to the Thought Card Podcast's huge Apple Podcast page. The reason why you want to do this is because you are trying to direct people to your resource. Don't hide it. Don't make it hard for them, because they're not going to listen. They're not going to go check it out if it's hard to find. Our job as content creators is to create amazing audio content, but it's also our job to figure out ways to make it super easy for people to follow us, to subscribe to our shows, to pay us, to contact us. So you have to be super specific and make it easy for them by linking to that specific episode in the podcast players. If you have a lot of capacity, I would say at least linking out to maybe 5 podcast players would be a good first start, okay? Because some people are on Apple Podcasts, but others are on Spotify or Overcast or TuneIn or Google Pods. There's just so many that you can direct them to. And also an add-on to this tip is that you can also have Podlink as your URL to one of the links. So for example, for me, I say, listen to this episode on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Amazon, Pandora, and any other podcast player. And in that hyperlink text, any other podcast player, I will have the Podlink. So Podlink is a universal podcast link. And what it does is that it pretty much allows people to figure out what podcast player they want to listen to you on and make it easy for them to find all in one place. So when I'm actually sharing my episodes on like social, depending on the aspect, I may actually link out to my link instead of my actual show notes page, because I want people to get into the habit of like, okay, I need to follow her show. And Podlink is like the easiest place to just be able to be like, follow my show here. All right. So number two, do not just link out to your Apple Podcasts. Don't be lazy. Take it one step further. Make sure you're linking out to that specific episode within the podcast players. Okay. Very, very, very important. Okay. Something else that I see a lot of podcasters doing is that they are not including keywords or key phrases in their podcast episode titles. So if you've been following me for a while now, you know how important I stress the fact that podcast titles, your episode titles, are so important. So podcast hosts and a number of other studies have come out that actually dives deeper into how do people discover new to them shows, right? So I'm actually going to pull up this blog post I just literally am going to hit publish on that has more of the details in there. But there are a number of things that actually people who are looking for shows, what they will actually look at. So the first thing that they look at is the podcast description. Okay. Meaning that, after your cover art blurb, there's a blurb, right? They're going to look at that to kind of say, is this for me? Is this not for me? Like, what is this about? Right. But then the second thing they look at is your episode descriptions. Sorry, episode titles. Sorry. The second thing they look at is your episode titles. So they're going to look at your archive, your beautiful archive, and they're going to just quickly scan, like literally less than 10 seconds. If you are vague, if you only have the person's name, if you have catchy titles, but it's unclear, you've lost the game. You've lost this potential listener. So what I always encourage my clients and my community members to do is to take a step back and ask the question, is this clear? If someone just found me random, I popped up in front of them, I was like, hey, look at this title. Is this clear? What are they going to say? If the answer is, I don't know what the heck is going on here, then you have some work to do, because our goal with our podcast marketing and discoverability, especially this long-term focus, is to make things clear so that we don't have to be continuously talking about our stuff on social, because people are searching for us. They're going to find us. They're going to see with 100% clarity that this is for them. And your podcast episode titles play a huge role in that. Okay. So, in addition to the clarity, like making sure people can understand a gist of what this episode is about, whatever keywords you determined that you want to attract people to your content, it should be in that title. Okay. So, for example, I'm a travel podcaster. Let's say one of my keywords is how to find cheap flights, right? That's a keyword I identified, and that's what I want. I will include that in the episode title. Okay. So I want to make sure that signal boost, signal alert, this is about XYZ. Okay. So that is something that I see podcasters typically missing the mark on. And it will definitely help improve your show. Okay. Something I want to also mention in terms of like real case studies. So one of the things I do when I'm working with my one-on-one podcast coaching clients is helping them to figure out their SEO strategy, helping them to clean up their archives and revisit their episode titles. And I'm going to tell you that I have clients who have gone from 100 downloads per month to 1,000 downloads plus per month simply by auditing their podcast titles. If you have a show that has episodes in your back catalog, yes, 100% go back and look at them for clarity, but also, is there a keyword in here? Like, what is the keyword? Are people searching for this? So there's again a lot of things that you can do to optimize and grow without publishing new content. Okay, without publishing new content. There's a lot of, your archives are very valuable, a lot of riches in there. Consider definitely taking another look at them. Okay. All right. Let's see. Another don't is brevity. So a lot of podcasters are also keeping things extremely brief. You're only having one or two paragraphs in your show notes on your website. It's one or two paragraphs. And they say to themselves, well, I don't want people to get too much value from, I don't want them to give it all away on the page. And I'm gonna push back on you, and I'm gonna push back on you and say, because you need those words to convince the people to actually go and listen to your show, right? Like, you need those descriptive words, giving them resources. Number one, your podcast show notes could be a resource hub for your show, meaning all the juicy tidbits can be living on your website that you control, right? But number two is that, like, yes, I want to spell it out. For me personally, I spell everything, most of everything out on the page, because my approach is a little bit different, where my people can be readers of my site, my readers of my blog, or they can be podcast listeners. So I offer them two options, and then hopefully I'll add video. So I offer them three options to consume the same piece of content. Okay. Because even if I don't capture them in the download section, like in my podcast, they will read my page. They will subscribe to my newsletter. They will follow me on YouTube, right? So it's not about giving too much away. And it's not about leaving your show notes to the end where you're just like blazing through it. And you're like, I just got to get something out, just whip something together. You're missing out on such valuable real estate. Something that I think is important in what I do when I teach my coaching clients is thinking about your show notes as part of your workflow. Whether you outline and you script, whether you record your podcast, you edit your podcast, you do your show notes. These are all things that happen to actually get the episode published. It's not like a mad dash rush. It's intentional. And this is truly what will help you to grow from 100 downloads per month to 1,000, like I mentioned, my clients are making simply by brevity does not serve you in this aspect. When you actually transcribe your podcast, let's say you have a half an hour show, you'll be surprised that there are thousands of words that you say. Okay. You can remix those words and have them populate to your show notes. Okay. So you don't have to recreate the wheel from scratch. Another thing I also want to mention is that there's a lot of AI tools as well right now that are making things even easier right now for you to be able to extract all the juicy bits from your audio and put it on a page on your website. So I want to give a real ecstatic shout out to Capshow, because I've been using Capshow. They're also a partner for our new podcast, Women of Color Podcasters. And I've been using Capshow to create our show notes page for all of our episodes. And let me tell you, it is so wonderful having a clean first draft. Through AI, I could look at the clean first draft, add my tidbits, remove stuff, and it's not all in me having to create everything from scratch. And I know Akila, I hope we can connect and I can learn more about your SEO Assist tool, but there are just a lot of AI tools right now, especially in the podcasting content creation space, that can assist us with these creation of our show notes. It's not going to do it for us. It's going to assist us, okay? So that's something that I want to make sure people know about. And this is where things are trending. And as a user, and as a past blogger, also, I'm very happy with how I'm using Capshow in particular for my show notes. Okay. So those are really the biggest mistakes that I see podcasters making. And I'm going to do a quick recap and let me know if you have any questions based off anything we talked about. Nikita says, Capshow is amazing. Yes, it is amazing. It's interesting because I was like AI kind of like, I would say it was AI what is it, speculating or like speculative? Yeah, I was like, AI. Ugh, whoa. Is this the Matrix? Are we part of the Matrix? Like, that was me. But like, I'm now AI curious and I'm seeing how AI can help and assist us and improve our productivity. Again, it's not going to create it from scratch for us, but it can be a tool that you could use to get ahead. So as a user, I'm very, very excited about it. And yeah, let me know if you have heard of them, and happy to share with you my link if you're interested in checking them out. All right. So let me know if you have any specific questions about show notes. This is part one. Next Friday, I'm going to talk about the do's. So some of the things that we should be doing, and in particular, things that I'm experimenting with, right? So I feel like podcast show notes are this like they're fluid, right? Like my last year's show notes look a little bit different than this year's show notes based off of the things I'm learning and how I'm learning about how to attract my audience. So I want to talk to you about the things that I'm advising my clients, the things that I'm doing myself, and just what I see trending in terms of show notes production. Okay. Sarah says, same Z's. All right. Okay. So let's do a quick recap. And then I leave you for today. So these things are things to avoid when it comes to your show notes. Avoid embedding your podcast player in the first paragraph. Your first paragraph should be the hook your folks in, and also include your keywords. Okay. You also want to link to specific episodes in various different podcast players. Don't forget that you could use Podlink also as a universal link to kind of direct people to, and they can figure out wherever they want to listen to it from there. Okay. Absolutely don't forget to look at your episode titles with a new eye and fresh perspective and ask yourself, is this clear? Is this compelling? And does this episode title have the keyword, right? When someone's typing something into the podcast players or on Google, can they have potential to actually find me? If the answer is no, take a step back and rework your title. Okay. Also, keeping your show notes brief and feeling like you have to like keep all the juicy bits in your episode file. And again, if you have a more comprehensive approach to your brand, because your podcast is not only your audio file, okay? It's not. So if you have a more comprehensive approach to your brand, you're saying, okay, people can come from my podcast to my website, or from my website to my podcast. Like a lot of this movement, a lot of this flowing movement here. But it's true. It's like, no matter where, they're going to find me. They're going to find me no matter if they come through the podcast or the website or YouTube. They're going to find me, right? And there's no point in holding things back. Actually offer them a little bit more to incentivize them to actually follow you in the long run. Okay. So that's all that I have for you for today. I hope it offered you some fresh perspectives, some insights. I know a lot of you follow me for a long time, and I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I think it's really important for us to just remember how important long-term marketing is, and how if you're tired of social media in terms of like having to promote your show and you're not seeing great results, take a look at SEO. Like, take a serious look at SEO, because it can truly change your life. I think one of the results of strategically growing a show, is excitement. When you realize that people are actually listening to your podcast and they care about your content and they actually want more, you'll actually wake up in the morning excited to create and produce. You'll go after those opportunities. You'll be consistent. And these are all the things I see my coaching clients, when they came through the door, they were just not as confident, and they were just sort of like discouraged and deflated. But through SEO and other long form marketing strategies, they're building their confidence and they're excited. I have a client that texts me like at least once a week. I hit a milestone, downloads, not promoting on social, but simply leveraging SEO and these long form marketing strategies. Okay. Thank you, CJ. Thank you so much. Great tips as usual, Danielle. I appreciate that. Nikita says, this was really helpful and insightful. I appreciate that as well. So that's all I have for you for today. Again, tune in next Friday, another quick little session. We're going to talk about the do's, all right? And the things I see, and I advise my clients to add to their show notes to just, again, stand out and apart from the rest. Have a wonderful and blessed weekend, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye for now.